How confident are you that the AI tools your school has adopted this term are truly GDPR compliant, meet the new product safety expectations, and keep every pupil's data safe? Whether you're new to AI tools or have been exploring them for a while, this episode of this podcast is for you. Welcome to the National College Podcast. I'm Sophie Campbell-Ford, and today I'm joined by edtech consultant and AI education specialist Darren Coxon to tackle one crucial question. How can schools harness AI while keeping safety and GDPR at the core? We'll unpack the latest product safety guidance, the must-ask questions for vendors, and where regulation is heading next. Let's get started. Darren, thank you ever so much for joining us at the National College today. So, to start us off, why is safety such a crucial consideration when it comes to AI tools and products in education?
I think one of the main reasons is that the potential for AI to impact our education system, both positively and potentially negatively, is quite high. We can use these tools already to do so many things, to save so much time, to get so much more insights from our data, to explore new creative ways into teaching and learning. But equally, there are big concerns around things like, how are we going to keep students' data safe? How are we going to keep teachers' data safe? Where is the data going? What happens to the data when these AI tools use, when we interface with these AI tools? It just means we have to be extra careful, because there are so many unknowns with AI that it just means that those policies and processes and the legal and compliance requirements, it almost becomes more important because there are so many factors that we just simply don't have control over.
So what are some of the risks that we're looking at when we're talking about pupil data and AI tools?
Well, I think, the most obvious one is when a student or when a teacher interfaces with AI, when they're chatting with AI, what happens to that data? For example, is it being used to train the AI model further? Because we know these AI, what are called deep neural networks, which is basically the foundational architecture of these AI systems, they need to be fed. They're like I talk about how it's almost like a digital version of the human brain. And in the way that the human brain needs to be fed, AI needs to be fed, and it needs to be fed your data. It kind of needs messy, human, unstructured data in order to learn and to grow and to develop. And so these AI companies, they need your data. But of course, in an educational setting, we cannot give authorization to use students' data. It's essentially their intellectual property. So we need to be very, very careful about the tools that we use, so that we are really making sure that, particularly the data of under 18s, that we're really doing everything that we possibly can to keep that safe.
So I guess then what you're saying is privacy and data protection, especially GDPR, should influence the development and implementation of AI tools in schools. How can that be achieved?
First and foremost, you have to choose the right tools. So if we take ChatGPT is one example. There are lots of tools out there now, but ChatGPT is the classic example because it's the one most people know. If you use ChatGPT, if you sign into ChatGPT straight out of the box and start prompting, that data is being used. So straight away, you've got an AI tool which is using your data. How it uses your data, quite frankly, not even the developers themselves know exactly, because the AI is the ultimate black box. However, you can turn that setting off. So you can actually go into settings, data security, and OpenAI basically have a feature that says improve the model for everyone, which is in some respects is a slightly passive aggressive way of saying, if you turn that feature off, you're not helping other people. So it can make, I think they're using a bit of psychology there. So you can turn that feature off with ChatGPT, but there are other tools, Google Gemini, for example, who've literally just released guidance and a model which under 13s can use, because they're now saying our AI ticks all the boxes. So I think the first thing that you need to do is you just need to make sure that you know the right tools. The only way that you can do that is to read the terms of service, read the privacy notices, and actually understand exactly how the data is being used and where it goes.
So a few months ago, we saw some DfE releases around AI, and particularly focusing now on the product safety expectations guidance. How is that guidance shaping the way that AI tools are designed for education settings at the moment?
I mean, I'm not sure it's necessarily shaping right now, but I think it will have to. So, I mean, product safety expectations is more focused in on when we have AI which faces pupils. So when pupils are interfacing with these tools. And as I just mentioned, Google have just basically, in fact, they came onto social media just the day before yesterday to say our tools are now compliant with the UK's product safety expectations. And there are several key factors that school leaders need to bear in mind. What we call deployers. So if you're a deployer of an AI system, you're actually using the AI in your setting. So for example, there are several aspects that we need to be aware of, but the key ones are if a pupil is using the tool and they access inappropriate content, for however they manage it, maybe they've done what lots of young people do and they try and hack into the system and they try and jailbreak it or whatever, and they actually get something which is inappropriate. There needs to be some alert mechanism, some flagging mechanism. Something needs to go back to the teacher to say, your kids have been doing, maybe prompting it in a way that they shouldn't. But the most important one is if a pupil discloses something to the AI tool, I'm being bullied, I'm really unhappy, that kind of thing, what we would call a safeguarding disclosure. There needs to be some alert that goes to the teacher. There needs to be some way to monitor the chats. There needs to be useful advice sent to the students so that they can actually, get some support. This is what you need to do. Another example is making sure that the students know that the teacher can see their chats, those sorts of things. So when a school is wanting to deploy an AI tool into their setting, if it's facing into the pupils, just to make sure that they understand product safety expectations and they're actually bringing tools in that they do have some control over.
Are there any other questions that you think leaders should be asking when they're thinking about implementing AI tools in their setting, either for pupils but for staff as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, do you understand how your data is being used? And again, this comes back to product safety expectations. One of the other factors that they say schools should consider is making sure that something like the terms of service or the privacy notices or the data, the notice which shows how your data is being used, are written in child-friendly language, so that the pupils themselves understand how their data is being used, where it's going, how it's being retained, who has access to it, what, will it be something that they lose control over? And then the other one is around, and again, this also factors into the AI in education policy which came out, is schools and teachers and leaders need to understand that a student's work is their intellectual property. And so they have to authorize. And that also, interestingly, this is an interesting conundrum. We talk a lot about plagiarism detectors, so AI plagiarism detectors. And actually, there's a lot of research to show they don't work particularly well. But, JCQ have said, that's a tool that you can use. But actually, that is introducing a student's work into a large language model. So actually, the student needs to give authorization for the teacher to upload their work to a plagiarism detector. So they could almost turn around and say, no, I don't give that authorization. So I can see us getting into some quite thorny challenges in the coming months and years, where more and more young people realize that actually that essay is their intellectual property. So that's another consideration that needs to be borne in mind.
From your perspective, what are some of the common misconceptions that schools may have about AI tool safety and data protection?
I think, I guess one of the misconceptions simply comes through ignorance. Just not even being aware that they lose the sort of the control of that data. I mean, I had a really classic example quite recently, and this was a CEO of a schools group who proudly showed me how she was using ChatGPT, and I said, have you turned that data control setting off? And she said, what setting? So I think that's definitely a kind of a misconception or a misunderstanding, where some schools aren't even aware of how data is being used. They may just think that they're chatting to it in the way that they might be writing something into a Word document where it just is saved. Well, actually, that's just not the case at all. So I think that for me is probably the main one, where you simply go into using these tools with quite a high degree of ignorance. And the problem with that is, of course, you might also, as well as prompting and chatting an AI model, you might upload data to an AI model. You know, you might upload school-sensitive data or personally identifiable data, and then you really have completely lost control of it. So that's probably one of the main things that I suppose most concerns me. It's just, quite frankly, ignorance.
And what could be the implications of doing that, if you can spell those out?
Worst case scenario, you get ICO knocking on your door, that someone makes a complaint, ICO, and you know that they actually invest, and that has, you know, we hear examples even in schools in the last few months where actually that has happened, where maybe a parent has heard that a school have uploaded their child's EHCP to ChatGPT to analyse it, and they know enough about AI to know that is actually a data breach, and so they contact ICO, and ICO have to follow through. So that's probably the worst case scenario, and that's happening now. So this is not something that is kind of you know, we worry about it further down the track. I mean, if you're in a school in the EU, potentially even more of a challenge, because the EU AI Act basically will fine schools, less likely, but the fines could still be quite high. But the providers of AI systems can be fined up to 35 million euros, or 7% of their global annual turnover, for the worst cases of misuse of AI. So this stuff is real. I mean, these risks are real. The financial penalties could be existential for some companies, far more so than GDPR, so which is why we have to take it seriously.
So with those challenges in mind, what practical steps can schools be taking to verify that the AI tools that they're implementing comply with current UK regulations and practice?
Well, first of all, understand product safety expectations. You know, understand GDPR. You know, understand how you need to be able to manage and control your data. Look into the problem that you have, the problem schools have right now is that, okay, if you're using a tool like Google Gemini out of the box, and it's inside of your Google school tenancy, in other words, you're a Google school, or if you're using Microsoft and you're using inside your Microsoft tenancy, your data's pretty safe. I mean, they have, you know, data encryption. But the problem that schools will have is if they're using other tools, I won't name them, but there are plenty of AI in education tools that I think you kind of referred to it in one of the introductions, these kind of education-facing tools. It's actually very hard to know, because you might be using a tool that has a certain AI model in the background. It's what we call a wrapper, so it's wrapped, you know, you have a user interface, but basically the AI is sitting in the background. You may not know how that is retaining your data or potentially using your data. And so actually, if you're stepping away from using tools that don't, if you step away from your Google tenancy or your Microsoft tenancy into the murky world of AI wrappers, actually it's very hard to know exactly what's happening. So you've got to ask very strong questions of the providers. You need to be meeting with the vendors. And if they're a bit cagey, and if they're like, oh no, it's fine, don't worry about it, but they've got no way to verify, then I wouldn't go anywhere near those providers.
So with that in mind, how do you see the balance between harnessing the benefits of AI in education while ensuring that robust safeguards are in place for students and staff?
First of all, it has to start with the leadership. They need to spend the time to learn about the tools, understand the tools, you know, dig behind the scenes, ask the right questions, read the terms of service, you know, really take the time to dig into them so they really understand them well, to make sure that you have very, very clear acceptable use agreements. You know, an example would be something along the lines of, we will use AI for reporting, but only in this narrow way. We won't allow you to introduce student data into this particular tool, but this tool is fine. So this tool is okay for this and this purpose, but actually when you want to work with sensitive data, you can only use this one tool. So I think it's defining the parameters within which you can use these tools, but actually encoding that into policy So, an acceptable use policy or an acceptable use agreement will say, you can use these tools for these purposes, but you must not use these for others. And there need to be some fairly harsh penalties. I mean, I think if you're making it very clear how teachers can use these tools and it is found that it's been ignored, for me, it's very similar in the way that we would, do safeguarding and child protection training. And then actually it's found that that teacher has just ignored that and put children at risk. That's a serious that's potentially gross misconduct. I don't think we ever see it as being as serious as a child protection incident, but I certainly don't think that you can ignore it if you're training staff very clearly and giving very, very clear guidance through policy. If staff continue to kind of upload because it's quick and easy and they can just upload their EHCPs to ChatGPT and then it's found out and parents complain, I think that does need to be taken seriously by leadership.
So with the launch of the National College's Teacher and Leader AI tool, can you share any examples of how the National College has ensured that this tool aligns with UK regulations?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we know that as an organisation, National College is GDPR compliant. So, everything that you do, the way you use data, the way you manage data, the way you retain data, who you share data with, is all GDPR compliant. So that's actually a really strong starting point. Even before we factor AI into the equation, we know that National College is GDPR compliant. So when you're working with AI tools, you're naturally taking that position because it's just baked into what you do. I think one of the main factors to consider here is, what are you using at the back end? What AI models are you using, and what platforms do you use that kind of sit behind the scenes? Because you've got your tool, teachers and leaders will be able to use your tool, put prompts into the tool, get a response. But what's happening behind the scenes? Because you're using Microsoft Azure at the back end, both for how you manage data, how you store data, how you work with data, that's all encrypted to a very, very high degree. It's well known that Microsoft's encryption standards are some of the best in the business. So you're actually working with an AI provider that is just very, very secure in the first place. It encourages me and it gives me comfort, which is why it's great to work with you guys. It gives me real comfort to know as to how you're approaching this ethically as well. So focusing on sustainability, thinking about the way in which you're using AI to make it as efficient as possible, the models that you're using to make sure they're as efficient as possible, so that actually you're also limiting the carbon footprint and the environmental cost of these tools. So it's about the ethics and it's about the GDPR, but it's also about the way that you're using them in a way which is just quite frankly as ethical as possible.
And so finally, looking ahead, how do you think regulations and product standards for AI in education might evolve over the next few years to reflect what we've discussed today?
I think we'll see more guidance and legislation around pupil AI use. Most of the use for AI in education to date has been the teacher, lesson planning and writing resources and that kind of thing. It even feels like the government have kind of focused on, even Keir Starmer, when he stands up in front of the House, the Downing Street in January, I think it was of this year, and said, AI can save teachers time. He literally began his speech to say, AI can cure some of the world's diseases, and isn't it amazing? But it can also help teachers save some time. It felt like there was a slight lack of ambition, but I think what we will start to see is we will start to see more and more AI tools being used facing into pupils of all ages. Google, we've just heard, good example of that. And I think as a result, we'll just see more onus put on ensuring that the school leadership teams are doing everything that they possibly can to choose the right tools, to write the right policies, and then to monitor that use to keep children safe.
Thanks so much, Darren, for joining us and for talking about AI with us once again. If you are not yet a member of the National College, now's the perfect time to join thousands of schools across the country accessing expert-led professional development, compliance management, people development, and now Teacher and Leader AI, all in one place. Visit nationalcollege.com to learn more.